Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Can you hear me? Okay. Arslan is saying, sir, अगर कोई जी अरसलान आप क्या कहना चाह रहे हैं? ओके कोई बात नहीं, ठीक है ठीक है. अच्छा जी, आज हम स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं अपना नया लेक्चर. आपके अभी तक एडिक्शन साइकाइट्री पर लेक्चर्स नहीं हुए, क्या ऐसा ही है? सब्सटेंस यूज डिसऑर्डर्स पर लेक्चर्स आपके नहीं हुए. इज इट सो? या कोई लेक्चर आपका हुआ है, क्लास लेक्चर? प्लीज मुझे बताइएगा चैट बॉक्स में कि अभी तक कोई सब्सटेंस यूज का लेक्चर नहीं हुआ आपका फाइनल ईयर में. ठीक है बच्चों, तो अब हम स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं और इंशाल्लाह आज हम इसको प्रॉपरली इस टॉपिक को स्टार्ट करते हैं. सबसे पहले सब्सटेंस यूज डिसऑर्डर्स. सब्सटेंस यूज से what do we mean by substance use? These are the substances that are usually either illegal or their consumption should be controlled in terms of intake by the society norms. They can also be some prescription drugs which a person starts abusing or without a proper prescription, and then they become habit forming. So substance use disorders include various category of substances. You can divide them into broader groups, like for example the substance that are depressive. Depressive means that they depress your central nervous system. They include substances like alcohol, opioids, and benzodiazepines among prescription drugs. Then there are substances that we call stimulants, and as the name implies, stimulants excite the central nervous system. They stimulate the central nervous system and produce symptoms like that of mania. Stimulants include drugs like cocaine, desamphetamine, also called ice by in the layman language, because its crystal is shaped like an ice cube, and other amphetamines are also included in the stimulants group. So these two groups, depressive and stimulants. Then there is a third group, which is hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are those whose main effect on your nervous system is that they produce hallucinations in the person who takes them. So that is another category. And then there is another category of volatile substances like petroleum, like some people sniff bonds. So these also are included as a group. So these are broadly the groups, and you have to keep in mind these. The first one is those that depress the central nervous system. Second one, those that stimulate the central nervous system. And the third one, that are hallucinogens. And fourth one is uh, the ones that are basically volatile substances like petroleum, etc. Okay, now before we uh, dig into detail the different groups, and let me tell you that the first group that we will discuss today, that will be the topic of our lecture, is the group that is depressive, or that is CNS depressant group, not depressive in sense of mood, but in sense of CNS depression. So before we start that, let's go through some basic terminology. What is drug abuse? Drug abuse is a term that we use when someone is taking some substances that are either excessive in use or harmful. For example, a person is taking alcohol, but the amount of alcohol he's taking is excessive, and it is known that such amounts can lead to harm in the future. That will be drug abuse. Similarly, there are substances like opioids, for example, and if someone is taking them without prescription, uh, they are considered in the pattern of drug abuse. But there is a difference between drug abuse and drug dependence, and that is very important to understand. When that we use the term drug dependence, we mean that a particular person has such a pattern of use of these illicit substances that now he has become dependent on that particular drug and cannot live without it. This dependent syndrome is classified or diagnosed by a certain criteria. And the criteria in the DSM is that a person is said to be dependent on a substance if he fulfills at least 3 out of these following criterias for most time of the previous year. Previous year means that the year that has just passed. So these are, what are the criteria? Inability to control intake once started. That means that once the person starts taking, for example, alcohol, and he has in mind that I will stop after a drink or two. But what happens is that as he drinks, he loses control and he is unable to curtail his intake to the amount that he had in his mind originally. Then second criteria is taking substance more often than not in excess of what is considered to be safe. And third is very important, that is the evidence of tolerance. And tolerance means that now to produce the same pleasant effect that the drug produced previously, you need a higher dosage of that particular substance. So tolerance means that you have to gradually increase the substance use to get the same pleasurable effect, and this phenomena occurs because of desensitivity of the receptors when the drug intake is chronically high. Then there is withdrawals, and withdrawals, as you know, are the symptoms that a patient experiences when the substance he used to take is not available. These symptoms do not appear in every person. They appear in the persons who are heavily dependent on that particular substance, so that when the level falls, since the receptors have already been downregulated, they feel the withdrawal symptoms, which are usually opposite to the symptoms that are produced by the intake of that particular drug. Then the person exhibits primacy of drug seeking behavior. What is primacy of drug seeking behavior? Primacy means foremost importance, which means that now the taking of drug, making it available for use, that becomes the top priority for that individual. He neglects other responsibilities in order to procure that illegal substance, and in that his family may be neglected. He uh, may be ignoring the expenses of his children in order to save the money for the drug use. These type of behaviors are evident. Only thing that becomes foremost importance in his life is the drug. And the last criteria is that continued use of the drug despite evidence of negative consequences. For example, the person has a blood test and his LFTs are elevated, showing that already liver inflammation has started. Then, in spite of that evidence, he continues his drug intake or alcohol intake. That's another criteria. Not all these criteria need to be met, but 3 out of these need to be met for most of the time in a year, in a 12 months period, to uh, categorize someone as drug dependent. So every drug abuse is not equal to drug dependence. Drug dependence is a more severe category. Right. So the first thing is that now we are studying the first disorders, which are about alcohol use. As you know, that alcohol is the most widely used substance in the whole world, and especially in the modern world, where the Western societies, they allow for the intake of a controlled amount of alcohol, and uh, there is a social a social sort of consent for its controlled use. It is the most common substance there, and even in Pakistan, it is by no means rare. Uh, there are no reports. Uh, Superficially, it looks that in an Islamic state there will be very less use of alcohol, but uh, it's not the case. It is illegally available, and many patients uh, come to us with that drinking problem. So, firstly, just to give you an overview of what we are going to study in a substance use disorder, keep this fact in mind that the harmful effects of that substance can be categorized into these broad categories. One, the bad effects that are produced by the intoxication of that substance. That is, those effects that you feel when you take that substance in excess. These are usually acute effects. Then the second category is the withdrawal related side effects, which means the effects that will come when a person who is dependent on that particular drug will not find it available, and the body produces some symptoms. And third is the physical disorders that the substance causes. Like, for example, alcohol causes liver damage, CNS damage, pancreas damage, and even myocarditis. So these comes in the physical disorders. And last will be the psychiatric disorders that are caused by the continued drug intake. So there are four types: intoxication related, withdrawal related, uh, physical disorders, and the last one is the psychiatric disorders caused by that substance. Intoxication of alcohol is no surprise. You have seen it in various movies. Uh, what it is like, there is a drunken state. If there is a lot of intoxication, there can be oversedation, which can lead to respiratory depression, and even death can happen if the dose is very high. Then there is balance problem. Uh, One cannot walk straight ahead, uh, and his balance keeps swaying when he is under the influence of alcohol. There is impairment of judgment. You, when you are under the influence of alcohol, your ability to make a sound judgment is severely compromised. So you cannot do as good decisions as you used to do in the absence of intoxication. And for example, if you are driving, you may make a fatal error under the influence. Disinhibited behavior. This is also commonly seen in movies, that when a drunken person either attacks another person or sexually assaults another person. So these disinhibited behaviors, when the frontal cortex loses its control on the behavior, they are a phenomena included with the excessive intake and intoxication of alcohol. The second component of the disorders, which come when the withdrawals happen, they will be considered next. And one thing is that withdrawals are not experienced by all abusers of a particular drug. They are usually experienced by those who have a dependence on the substance, and who have a chronic high intake of that substance. What are the common symptoms? Again, you have to remember that the withdrawal of any drug will be opposite to the acute effects that it produced. You know, alcohol produces a calm effect on the body, so its withdrawal includes anxiety. Alcohol produces oversedation, so its opposite effects is lack of sleep, insomnia, in the withdrawal, tremors of hands, and shaking of the body is a very important clue in various alcohol dependent people that tells you that the person might be in a withdrawal state. Palpitations, tachycardia, these are the common symptoms. These common symptoms, although they are worrisome for the patient, they are not dangerous for his life. So we can treat that patient on an outdoor basis if he has only that symptoms. But there are, and this is a very important part, there are more severe withdrawal symptoms as well. And the two that I want you to always remember are number one, seizures, and number two, delirium tremens. Seizures, as you know, type of fits that occur, for example, in epilepsy. Fits do not only occur in epilepsy, in the withdrawal of alcohol, severe withdrawal, uh, a person can have uncontrolled seizures, and uh, if not managed properly, they can lead to significant morbidity and even mortality. Second, and even more important, is the delirium tremens. This is very important. What is delirium tremens? Firstly, what is delirium? Delirium is altered state of consciousness when a person is not oriented in space, time, person, etc., and a confused state of consciousness. This is delirium. And delirium tremens, or DT, is the delirium that occurs specifically in the alcohol withdrawal, in a serious, severe alcohol withdrawal. And its characteristic findings are that the person will be disoriented like in any other delirium, but an important thing is that it occurs about 72 hours after last drink, after the abstinence. Why is this important? For example, you work in an orthopedic department, and you are a house officer there or a medical officer there, and a patient comes to you with fractures in a roadside accident, and he has been admitted to your ward. He was relatively fine, but on the third day, he suddenly goes into delirium, a state of disorientation, and of course, this is a very alarming state because delirium can lead to potential mortality. Delirium carries a 25% risk of mortality. So this is a serious situation for any ward. What will happen? Your consultant will uh, work out all the possible causes. Testings will be done, blood cultures will be done, antibiotics trials will be given. But if you ignore this clinical entity, delirium tremens, the patient might uh, get killed, because this has a very different way of treatment than the usual delirium. So it's important to understand that in any hospitalized patient, you have to bear in mind that the alcohol withdrawal delirium should be included in the differential diagnosis of any delirium that occurs in a hospitalized patient. Typically, on the third day of admission, it occurs. It occurs In a minority of cases, even in severe cases, only a minority develop that. And there is a very important phenomena called Lilliputian hallucinations. This occurs specifically in this delirium, and it is a characteristic clue that is given in exams, in your exams, in USMLE exams, that point to the delirium tremens. And you have to understand this. Lilliputian hallucination means that if you remember Gulliver Travels, in Lilliput Island, the Gulliver Travel uh, encountered the what we call the small statured people who were very small in size, like tiny human beings. And the story goes like that, that they captured Gulliver Travels, and after that things happened, etc. So in delirium tremens, one has hallucinations of small people, like uh, those that Gulliver Travel have seen, would have seen in the island of Lilliput. Apart from that, small sized people, it's also seen that the hallucinations involve small insects that are smaller in size, or smaller sized animals too. So this is Lilliputian hallucinations. Importance of delirium tremens cannot be overstated. It can be readily fatal if it is not urgently treated. And very important point is that the benzodiazepines are the mainstay of treatment for this delirium. Why is this important? Usually in a delirium, we do not prefer benzodiazepines because they cause oversedation. However, in delirium tremens, benzodiazepines acting on GABA receptors are the treatment of choice. No other treatment will work as good as benzodiazepines. Okay, what are the what is the management of these withdrawals? Management involves, first of all, a clinical decision that whether you will let that patient go home and detoxify in an outpatient setting, or does the severity of condition merits that you admit the patient before detoxifying him. Most cases can be handled as an outpatient department, OPD patients. We can give him the prescription of benzodiazepines, which are then tapered over a period of 7 to 10 days, and that controls almost all of the withdrawal symptoms. Along with that, thiamine replacement is absolutely necessary. And why is it necessary? Because thiamine is depleted in chronic alcoholics, and especially in the withdrawal state, it can lead to, the thiamine deficiency can lead to Wernicke's and CAP, which we will study a bit later in Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Okay, so which patients you would like to admit rather than sending home? These patients include patients with comorbid physical disorders like heart disease or like diabetes, etc., which you would like to manage and you would like to monitor. They also include very old age people, and also they include pregnant females. So these are some of the high risk individuals or people who are known to have very serious withdrawals in the past. You would like to keep them as an inpatient for the management of potential withdrawals after you start the process of detoxification. And absolutely important is there should be rest, there should be good hydration. A person should not drive when he is undergoing detoxification treatment in his home. And these are some of the steps that you need to take in management of withdrawals. Then what psychiatric disorders are associated with alcohol? That is the third category. We covered the intoxication related problems, the withdrawal related problems, and thirdly and very importantly, the psychiatric disorders that are directly associated with alcohol. Among them, there is amnesias, and amnesias mean short-term memory loss, and that memory loss is the only cognitive deficit that is present in the individual. Person remembers person, for example, he has done his breakfast, but after 5 to 10 minutes he forgets. You tell him something, at that time he registers, he tells you that he has heard, and after 5 to 10 minutes he has absolutely forgotten what was said. And this goes on and on for short term memory. Usually the long term memory is spared in amnesias, short term memory is impaired. And one of the important amnesias that is caused by alcohol is Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, although more readily occurs in withdrawal, but it can occur in any state. It can occur in intoxication, in withdrawal, or in chronic use. So, in any condition, when there is a thiamine deficiency state, this Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome may develop, and this is a serious disorder. Person complains of acute balance problems. He complains of diplopia, that is double vision, and double vision occurs because eye muscles are paralyzed as there is no thiamine there. There is amnesia, which is again short-term memory loss, and in severe cases in Korsakoff syndrome, there is disorientation, and then the Korsakoff syndrome can further lead to even mortality. There is a significant amount of mortality and morbidity. About 1 in 4 patients who develops Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome uh, dies, and another 50% individuals, they the damage they have suffered in the Wernicke-Korsakoff, that damage stays with them even after the thiamine is replaced. However, in the early stages of disease, urgent thiamine replacement can reverse the disorder completely. So, in the Western world, there is a clinical rule that when you find a person unconscious and he is brought to the emergency, uh, and his blood sugar is found to be low, you first inject thiamine and then you give the glucose. This is very important because the importance is that if you will give glucose before you will give thiamine, the glucose, it takes away the thiamine that is available in the body even further, and it can precipitate our next NCAF condition. So it is a clinical practice that whenever they have to like inject IV glucose in an unconscious patient whose reasons are not known, and this is not known whether he has been dependent on alcohol or not. They give thiamine first, immediately followed by the glucose. Uh, then, very important, depression. Often, patients who are chronic users of alcohol, they come to psychiatrists with the complaints of depression, low mood, lack of pleasure in their life. Because alcohol, people think that alcohol produces a euphoric effect. It's not entirely true. Alcohol has an effect on the body that whatever is the prevailing mood of an individual, alcohol increases that prevailing mood. If you are happy before you intake alcohol, you will feel happier after the alcohol intake. But if you are sad before the alcohol intake, mostly people feel even more sad after the intake of alcohol. So whatever the mood prevalent in the person at that time, alcohol exacerbates or increases the uh, that mood. So when people they encountered life difficulties, when they start abusing alcohol, their uh, risks of depression increases tremendously. An important thing in this is that if a person comes to you with an alcohol problem and also with depression, if you just treat the depression and not the alcohol problem, that person seldom gets better, because the continuous presence of alcohol, this this does not allows the medication to work that properly as they would have in the absence of that. So a very important thing is that usually we tell them that you have to practice abstinence from alcohol. You have to stop the intake of alcohol for uh, several weeks, after which we will reassess you, because in most people when they stop alcohol over a period of several weeks, the mood improves on itself. We do not need medication in many cases. However, if still the mood does not improve after several weeks of abstinence, we can give them the usual treatment for depression. Similarly, anxiety disorders have a very strong link with alcohol. And again, if a person who is alcohol dependent complains of anxiety disorders, a priority should be given that he should be assisted to stop the alcohol intake, so that it can be evaluated after several weeks whether the anxiety stays or it goes on its own, so that we need to give treatment to that person. So uh, these are important. Then there is psychosis. Psychosis, as we studied in schizophrenia, psychosis means when a person loses touch with reality. In alcohol use, there is a specific type of psychosis which is also called alcoholic hallucinosis. And alcoholic hallucinosis means that the person starts hearing voices in his ears, just like a schizophrenia patient, but there is no other symptom of uh, schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders like delusions, negative symptoms, etc. There is no such thing as that, but there is hallucinations, true hallucinations, auditory, that the person hears. Significance is this type of psychosis does not need antipsychotics. If the person absists from alcohol, this improves on its own. It does not happen in everyone, but it happens in many people who are heavily dependent on alcohol, and withdrawing alcohol from their lives can cure the psychosis completely. Okay, so this much is for the alcohol. One important thing is that in Muslim societies, the alcohol use is totally discouraged, and uh, so there is no uh, safe limit taught to uh, taught to our countrymen about alcohol use. But in Western societies, those allow the use of alcohol socially. So there is this talk of controlled intake of alcohol, not total abstinence for most non-problematic users. And the safe limits are 14 units of alcohol for women and 21 units of alcohol for men a week, in a week. And then there is and the unit is alcohol is the amount of alcohol. It is about 8 grams of alcohol. So a unit of alcohol will be different in every drink. You may drink a can of beer, which may be having suppose 2 units of alcohol, versus a single drink of a small single drink, say 4 or 5 ml of whiskey. They might contain 3 4 units of alcohol. So it's not just the amount of alcohol you are taking, it is the form of alcohol too that matters a lot in determining whether you are abusing alcohol or not. Then in pregnancy, there is no safe limit of alcohol, and pregnant females are uh, told to stop alcohol altogether in all societies, especially in the first trimester, because if the woman continues to take alcohol, there is a syndrome called fetal alcohol syndrome, in which the facial features and are abnormal in the child, and there is also abnormality of some behaviors. So it is discouraged in pregnancy. Okay, now we come to opioid use disorders. Any question if you want to ask from me about this topic, you are most welcome. And then we go on to study uh, alcohol, the opioids use disorders. Opioids include street drugs like opium, morphine, etc. Sorry, not morphine is not street drug. Opium, heroin, etc. are street drugs, and also include medical substances like morphine. So opioids, even historically, have been widely used to treat different ailments of human beings. And this use is ancient. Ancient societies used opium for a variety of medical ailments. As for example, the clinical uses involve pain relief. Uh, you know very well that morphine is the most effective pain relief medication available. Anti-emetic use. They have a characteristic effect that they can stop nausea and vomiting. So they are included in as an anti-emetic. Then anti-diarrheal. If you study the if you study the treatment of diarrhea, we use loperamide, which is available as Imodium capsule, which is opioid in nature and used for the treatment of diarrhea. Then there is presence of opioids in the cough syrup as well. So it is used there too. So they have many clinical uses. Okay, opioid disorders. They are usually two main types of disorders. One, which are concerned with the intoxication of opioids. What do the intoxication of opioids do to your body? First of all, often a question will be asked in Viva or even in paper that out of opioid intoxication and opioid withdrawal, which one is more dangerous? And often students give the wrong answer. They say that the withdrawals are most dangerous. Why? Because in movies they have seen a heroin addict who is just crying and facing tremendous pain when he is in withdrawal, begging uh, for the heroin and to be given to him. So this picture, when this picture comes in mind of the student, he thinks that the withdrawal must be more dangerous, but it is not true. Opioid withdrawals are, scary. You will feel that the person is in tremendous pain. They are painful, but they are not dangerous to the life of the individual usually. So there is much less chance of mortality from withdrawal. However, opioid intoxication can be readily fatal. So if you suspect someone to have opioid intoxication, you need to hurry because this can kill him really fast. What are the signs? Signs are oversedation, respiratory depression, and very, very important pinpoint pupils. This pinpoint pupils, it is uh, one of the most important clinical cues as well as in exam. Whenever you encounter pinpoint pupils, you should understand that this person must be uh, intoxicated with opioids. Why is this important? Look, the person who you will encounter in emergency, and this is a common patient that will come in your medical emergency, will be a person who is brought by police or by some individual, and he found him lying unconscious on the side of a road or somewhere, and now you don't know what is the cause of unconsciousness. So, unconsciousness can have many causes. He can have a blood sugar problem, a hypoglycemia, he can have a stroke or other things. But when you find pinpoint pupils that are so small that they are characteristic, just like a pinhole camera, that small pupils, they tell you that this person has been suffering from opioid intoxication. So it is not just the exam point. In clinical practice too, looking at pupils is very important. Okay, and naloxone is the antidote. If you can give naloxone to the person who has opioid intake, it can readily reverse the intoxication. So it should be available in the emergency, and it is usually available in the medical emergency. Now, the dependence of opioids. Opioids, as all of you know, have a very strong dependence. Withdrawals are very common. Withdrawals are not life-threatening though. Relapse is fairly common. It is not uncommon that the heroin addict will tell you that I was admitted in a addiction hospital or in an addiction center for say 3 months, and they were told my parents that I will be cleared of this heroin problem once I come back. But the person who stopped using heroin there, when he comes back, more often than not, he suffers a relapse. So, relapse is very common. Why does the relapse occurs? This is an important concept to understand. And relapse occurs not only in opioids but almost in all substance use drugs. Why it occurs? Because the substance that you are taking is hijacking the player giving centers of your mind. These centers are present in midbrain and they include the dopamine receptors. So, when you take the substance, say opioid or alcohol, etc., they stimulate the reward centers of your brain. In the absence of that pleasurable effect, your reward centers are understimulated because the receptors had down regulated when you were taking the medication. So you feel an enormous craving for the substance. So this concept is important because uh, one thinks that one is forced to take the drug because of the withdrawal symptoms. That's not true. Most of the people can successfully deal with the withdrawals. The problem occurs when after the withdrawals have been done, the drug has been cleared from their system. Even months after that, they can feel intense craving when they are in an environment where they used to previously abuse the drug, like old friends who used to do, or like stressful situations in life where they used to take alcohol. So this is an important thing, and it needs cognitive behavioral therapy to enable the individual to control the cravings and to avoid relapse. In the Western world, there are some medications like acamprosate, naltrexone, and some other medication that can reduce the craving of the patient. But in Pakistan, unfortunately, these are not available. Our main stay in avoiding relapse is cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, then clinical detoxification. Clinical detoxification in uh, the Western world, they provide buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is another opioid, so it is very similar to the opioids that the person might have been using, like heroin, etc. But this is a medical substance, and we can control its amount. So what we do is we convert the amount that the person was taking, for example, of heroin, and we convert it into the equivalent amount of buprenorphine by a scale of conversion, or methadone can also be used. And then we allow gradual tapering, that is decreasing the dose over a period of several days and in some cases even months until uh, it is gradually brought to zero and it's also stopped. This is an ideal way of doing detoxification because the person does not has very severe withdrawal symptoms and he is easily detoxified. In Pakistan, the problem is that the government does not allow buprenorphine in the concentrations that are needed for detoxification. They think that it will promote the culture of illicit illicit substances, that the person might start abusing buprenorphine. So they do not allow that, and that is a problem. So we do not have the exact medication to treat opioid withdrawals. What we do, we treat the symptoms of the withdrawal, and I will tell you what we do about that. But we have to treat every symptom individually, and that's is sad, because even with good medication, our patient has to suffer more than the person in the Western world, because they have the proper medication allowed. Now, opioid withdrawal symptoms include fever. And how do you control fever? You can give paracetamol, which can control fever. Tachycardia, we give beta blockers to control muscle aches and pains. This is very important. When we when we give the when we give do not when the person does not get the heroin he used to use, his body develops severe pains, because opioids have been playing with the pain relief centers of the brain, and the receptors there have down regulated. So even in the absence of an external pain, the person feels intense aches and pains, and due to which this symptom is the most troubling symptom in our patients. Usually, when we give them NSAIDs like Brufen or any other NSAID like that, the pain is poorly controlled. So we have to add something to control that pain. What we usually do is we add a medication like tramadol for time being, and then uh, we gradually taper it off. So by that, it can be adequately controlled. Then there is sneezing, increased watering of eyes and nose, diarrhea, and diarrhea is treated by loperamide, which is Imodium, and it can be easily treated. Vomiting, vomiting can be stopped by medication, antiemetic medication like Motilium or ondansetron, etc. Insomnia is very important. How do we treat insomnia? We give benzodiazepines, but only benzodiazepines often do not work for lack of sleep in opioid withdrawal. So we also give some sedating antipsychotics like olanzapine or quetiapine, which can then promote the sleep. These withdrawal symptoms, they look scary, but again, they are not dangerous to the life of the person, and these can be, uh, controlled. These symptoms, they usually remain for 7 to maximum 10, 12 days, and then the person has successfully detoxified himself. So this was our lecture for today, and I would like to ask you, if you have any questions here, you can ask me in next maybe 3-4 minutes, because time has already been exceeded. Any questions that you want to ask? Okay, so there is no question. That brings an end to this lecture. Hopefully, in the next lecture, we will study stimulants and the remaining two groups, that is hallucinogens and this volatile substances. One thing that we could not study here which is included in CNS depressants, are the benzodiazepines, which are often abused by the individuals like Xanax, Alp, etc. I will try to touch that too in the next lecture. Thank you for listening.